This video is the next part in the series of videos entitled Heroku Architecture Credential by Example. The full list of articles is available on a Medium article of the same title. So we're going to change gears this time. There is a kind of a theory of app development called the 12-factor app, and we are going to go through all the code that we've done so far and sort of draw specific examples to match up with the sort of theory of operation of, or theory of building really scalable and just really good apps. So let me look at the, if you just type in 12-factor app, there's an article, and basically it talks about web apps, and basically the key idea here is writing declarative, portable, and scalable applications. And it's definitely geared towards the web, right? So it's really about web applications, which is essentially what our API is. So one just point of distinction is, so the way that we're writing right now, we're writing simply a backend API, which is its own application. If I was to write like a React or Angular or Vue front end, that would probably live in its own repo, and in the vocabulary of this 12-factor app, that would be a separate application that would itself have follow this pattern. So we're only talking about the server side API in this context, because that's all we're building. Okay, and if you go through here, they actually have these different sections. There's 12 sections: code base, dependencies, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of, you can read this on your own. It's not terribly long, but what I'm going to do is go through here specifically and just point out how in our code we follow these patterns. Okay, so for code base, so I'm going to close this up. Okay, and just as a side note, I didn't Google it, but I have a suspicion that there's a strong connection between the people who wrote Heroku and the people who wrote the 12-factor app, because there's a lot of parity between the two. In fact, one seemed like a blueprint for the other. Okay, code base. So the first thing, the first rule of the single-factor app is having a single, for your app, you need to have a single code base, and that code base, in this case it's this hello cert repository, and this code has to be the same code regardless of the environment, whether you're developing locally, developing on a staging environment, and developing on production. And if you think about how we wrote this so far, it's exactly how we operated. We basically built, we pull this repo locally, we push it to Heroku, and then we promote slugs up as we move up to it, which is essentially the same code base. Okay, the next broad category is called, I should probably just keep this 12-factor app up here so you can keep track of. So we talked about the code base. Now let's talk about dependencies, right? So the key here of dependencies need to be, let me go back to here. Let's look at it this way. Dependencies need to be such that, one, you obviously need some sort of bootstrap. You need some sort of language-specific compiler or some sort of execution, right? So in this case, it's Node, right? And then it supplies its own package manager. And after that, all the other dependencies need to be declared, declaratively set in some configuration, right? And the idea is you don't want to have to manually deploy stuff in your different environments. And of course, how that's handled in the context of our application is we have our package JSON, right? And Node has this built in. We have our dependencies, which are the code that runs while the application's running. And then we have our dev dependencies, which all have to do with during the build stage, what is needed. Okay, so this is all explicitly declared in configuration. So that's an easy one. The next category is config, and it says store config in an environment. And in this case, think about how we dealt with basically managing different configurations across different environments between local, staging, or production. The way we managed that was, let me bring up the code base, right? Code. The way we handled that here locally, go all the way back in here, we had this environment file. And that basically, those set up basically a runtime environment for the application once running locally, and the way it was managed in Heroku was that each app had their own set of environment variables, settings, and here they are, the same ones. Okay, so that one again is pretty baked into the Heroku development process. Okay, the next category is backing services, right? So what they're saying is treat backing services as attached resources. So in this case, what the main theory is, right? You want to make all the other things like databases or Redis or things like that, they need to be exposed to the app in a way that you can move it easily between environments, right? And that means if you're developing locally, sort of the way you access these resources needs to be the same general way you access them from when you're in your production or staging environments. So the way we handled that here was, if you look at our local environment file, we have this database URL, right? So the way that our application locally knows how to connect to a database is through database URL. And then, of course, the same applies when we look at a Heroku instance, right? I'm running here, and in fact, that, if you think about it, that's what allowed us to easily change when we wanted to move to when we did a Heroku Connect. We moved from a local database to a database that's sitting on our staging environment, and all we had to do was change one line in a configuration, and now our local app was actually pointing at our staging environment. So that's the whole point of it. It just makes it, the whole point here is making it very easy and declaratively, map each of the environments mapping to their resources. And kind of related to this, if you remember, if you look at the app JSON, which I can't find, right? One of the things we needed to do was declaratively set up when we ran in our review apps. We need to be able to spin up different add-ons, and that's what this was here. So, and then we also needed to pick up the environment, like some environment variables too. So that's kind of, the sort of review apps is a special case, but we also kind of follow that pattern here where we declaratively set up our resources. Okay, enough about that. Let's go through 12-factor app. Build, release, run is next time. So basically, strictly separate build and run stages, right? And in this case, if you just look at Heroku, right? And I'm not sure if I can visually see this right now without doing a build, but if you remember when we deployed code here, right? I guess we can see it here. There is a build stage, right? And that's where we're running in a, our build pack is running. It's compiling a slug, right? And then we also had a phase where we actually had, I don't think you can really see it right now, but we also had a release phase, right? Where the environment, the slug was built, but then we had to do like the migrations, things like that had to happen afterwards. And then there's a run stage after that where that slug, all the environment variables and whatnot, all get pulled together into a release. And by the way, the releases are numbered here. See these release numbers here? And they're run on a stack. And then that's the running dyno running your stack. So that's the main point is that the vocabulary of 12-factor app is pretty much what we've been learning so far related to how Heroku apps are built, released, and then run. So I don't think there's much more to add to that other than this is basically Heroku. So processes, execute apps is one or more stateless processes. Right? So if you think about how we wrote our apps, Let me think about the best way. All right. So I think the best way to see this is the way that we stored data. Let me see if I can go back to the code. If you remember, one of the decisions we made at one point was how do we keep track of the authentication. So see right here when we did authentication, we created this token, right? And instead of trying to save that token in some sort of memory inside the running node application, we actually use Redis to keep a copy of that token. And the reason why we did that is it allowed us to not maintain state in this particular running dyno. And then what that allows us to do is go into resources and up the number of dynos. I won't do it now, but we were able to up the number of dynos without regard of the fact that no one of them maintained any state. So, and also, if there was one of the features of Heroku that I kind of dismissed or suggested not to do, it's a no-no. That is that whole sticky session thing where you could sort of force route your traffic from one user back to the same, using cookies behind the scenes back to the same dyno. That's while it's a feature of Heroku, it's not a feature that the 12-factor app recommends. Okay, so that's basically all there is to that. Port binding, this one's pretty easy. The idea here is the way that your app should be written is it exposes itself to the running environment through basically just network ports. And so basically that's how our app runs, right? It basically, in fact, it's even better that in the sense that the way it's actually run is that we get the port number from the environment provided by our container, our stack provides this to us, and then we just listen to, we actually do HTTP listen here on that port, and that's how our app is exposed to the, to the just the world, basically by listening on a port. And this is on just for FYI. I mean, this is sort of baked into Node, to be honest. Other environments, if you were writing in PHP or things like that, your code is really intended to run within some other web, Apache or Nginx or something like that. So that's not really consistent with this pattern where your app is self-contained and it just listens on a port. Okay, so it's kind of baked into Node, to be honest. Okay, concurrency, scale out via the process model. I'm going to go here. This is a nice diagram. This diagram, ironically enough, lives, if you look at the Heroku docs, the same exact diagram is there, I mean to the T. And what this basically means is, and if you think about how we were able to, through our process, we have this process file, right? So if we go back here, it's our proc file. So we were able to, in this case, I don't think I have my worker here, but the idea was we were able to declare here different services that scale out different features, and I think that's called workload diversity in the world of this diagram, different kinds of things, right? And then within Heroku, by using these sliders, right, we can change the number of dynos running on any particular number of dynos running on any one of these types of dynos, right? And that's essentially what this diagram means. Our system allows us to run different types of dynos across horizontally, and then vertically we can also run a different number of them independently. And that's essentially what Heroku does. So that's kind of built into Heroku. Okay. The next thing, close down this window, I think. Close down this window too. Let's go back. Disposability, so fast startup and graceful shutdowns. Not much to say here other than the fact that Node itself is very quick to start up. It's actually designed with that in mind. And in terms of graceful shutdown, if you remember right, we didn't implement any example in our code, but if we needed to shut down, Heroku has a built-in feature where before it shuts down your dynos, it will send a sig term message to your code where you can do some pre-shutdown cleanup, maybe whatever you need to do. So that's actually built into the Heroku platform also. Dev prod parity, keep development, staging, and production as similar as possible. Don't need to say much about that. That's exactly how we've been working. We've been doing all the work locally, pretty much just push the code up to Heroku with just different environment variables, and we're done. Okay. Another topic is logging, with basically treating logs as event streams. You'll notice that our code, what this really is getting after here is, if you look at our code, our logging really just consists of just console logging, which goes to standard out. We don't do any log management code in our code. Our code just says, if I need to deal with logging, I'm just going to write it out to standard out. Let something else deal with the, and what was that something else? If you think about how we handled this, if you go back to Heroku app, one way of looking at the logs, of course, is by looking at this sort of kind of very abbreviated logs, right? But we also installed Papertrail, which had a much more robust system for managing logs, right? We can do searches, filtering, all sorts of stuff in our logs here. So the point is that our code only just writes the logs. It doesn't do anything else with logs, and we rely on some other system to do logs. So that's basically what the 12-factor app is saying. Just don't get fancy with logs, just write them. Everything, leave the other system to manage it. And then admin processes run admin management tasks as one-off processes. And if you think about how we dealt with our migrations, our seeding. If you go back and you recall, we were running this script here, the seed script. And this seed script actually happens automatically when we are running in our, I believe it's in, if I can find it. If I look in my, it is in my app JSON. So where's app JSON? Believe, right. We had a post-deploy step, and this was relevant only for review apps. Whenever the review app would run and the release is done, we would also run a post-deploy script to seed the database. That automatically happened sort of automatically in the context of our review apps. But in our other higher environments, meaning staging and production, we didn't want to seed our database all the time, right? So what did we do? We remote executed bash, which actually created a one-time dyno, which is basically your same code base, and creates a dyno that's essentially the same thing as your runtime environment. And then we were able to run this exact same script, right, to seed those databases. So we illustrated this pattern of again, this is about administrative process. Everything is kind of done in the context of your application running in some form. It would be in a different state. In this case, it's just running, it's just there and we're running scripts as opposed to running a process. Okay, so if you think about it, we've covered this 12-factor app pretty much touches across most of the features we've talked about with Heroku. So pretty much a good review of Heroku through the process. Okay, that's it for this video. It's nice and short.